Welcome to today's historical deep dive, and perhaps the ultimate cautionary tale of ambition. Imagine holding the fate of a continent in your hands, every decision sending ripples of war and peace across nations. Now, imagine that power inflating your confidence to the point where you challenge geography itself. Because today, we step into the boots of a man who reached the absolute peak of human ambition, standing on the precipice of his greatest gamble and his most devastating fall. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. And drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand on the banks of the river Niemen, bathed in the pale, ethereal light of a June dawn in 1812. Before you stretches a sight history will forever struggle to truly comprehend. The Grande Armée, nearly 700,000 souls, Frenchmen, Italians, Germans, Poles, Dutch, Swiss, Danes, Croats, a bewildering babel of tongues, a literal forest of bayonets, a human river of men and horses flowing relentlessly towards the vast, unknown Russian frontier. This isn't merely an army. It's a mobile nation, a staggering testament to logistical might, fueled by unwavering loyalty, or perhaps just fear, and the sheer, unadulterated force of one man's will. The air here doesn't hum with trepidation, but with crackling anticipation. Conquest feels not just possible, but utterly inevitable. A manifest destiny unfolding before your eyes. Napoleon himself, perhaps mounted on his famous gray Arab, Marengo, is here. A silent, watchful figure, observing the endless columns pour across hastily constructed pontoon bridges into the chilling emptiness of the East. His face, etched with the lines of years of relentless command and breathtaking triumphs, shows little outward emotion. But within him burns the familiar, all-consuming fire that has scorched Europe for a decade. He believes, utterly, that this is the final stroke, the decisive move that will force Tsar Alexander back into line, secure the stifling continental system, and solidify French dominance from the sun-drenched shores of the Atlantic to the distant, snow-laden slopes of the Urals. He sees not a rival empire, but a recalcitrant junior partner needing a firm, unforgettable lesson. The sheer scale of the undertaking is intoxicating. No army of this size has ever been assembled, let alone marched into such a distant, formidable land. Every step feels like a step into legend, a confirmation of his own invincible genius. The past, he feels, belongs to Caesar and Alexander. The future, unquestionably, belongs to him. This precise moment, poised on the threshold of Russia, is the absolute, dazzling zenith of Napoleon's power and his towering, almost terrifying confidence. It embodies his greatest strength, the audacious ability to conceive and execute operations on an unprecedented scale, inspiring millions to follow him into what others might deem the impossible. But it also whispers of his greatest, most tragic flaw, the deeply held belief that sheer will and raw force can overcome any obstacle, including immense geography, brutal climate, and an enemy's stubborn refusal to play by his established rules of war. It is the precise point where ambition ceases to be a tool and becomes a blind, unstoppable force, hurtling towards a precipice unseen in the morning mist. Here is the chilling, often overlooked insight. The very qualities that propel a leader to unimaginable heights, audacious vision, relentless drive, the almost mystical ability to inspire mass action, can, when left utterly unchecked, become the terrifying instruments of their own destruction. Success breeds a unique, terrifying form of self-delusion, where past triumphs aren't just memories, but seen as ironclad guarantees of future victory. And the leader stops asking, "What if?" and instead only demands, "Make it happen." The reflection for you, watching this titan at his peak, is stark. When seemingly everything you touch turns to gold, beware the glittering, dangerous illusion of invincibility. Humility isn't merely a virtue in leadership. It's a strategic necessity, a vital safeguard against the crushing overreach that history so consistently punishes with devastating force. This river crossing isn't just a military maneuver. It's a profound, philosophical boundary, crossed here with arrogant, blinding confidence into the realm where fate, silent and implacable, prepares its harshest lessons. You are in a room, perhaps in Dresden or Vilnius, the air thick with the scent of sealing wax and the rustle of strategic papers. Around you, maps spread like vast, intricate carpets, tracing the logistical arteries of the Grande Armée, veins of ambition pulsing across the continent. The invasion of Russia, this monstrous undertaking now gathering force, wasn't a sudden caprice. It was the slow burning of a political fuse sparked by a king who dared to say no. Tsar Alexander I. Alexander had grown weary, bone-tired, of the continental system. Napoleon's grand economic siege intended to choke the life out of Great Britain. For Russia, it was a tourniquet on trade, strangling the economy, starving state coffers. So he made a decision, a seemingly pragmatic one. He reopened his ports to neutral ships. On paper, a policy shift. In Napoleon's mind, a declaration of war. It shattered the fragile peace of the Tilsit alliance like dropped crystal. For Napoleon, this transgression went deeper than tariffs and trade routes. It was a personal affront, a direct challenge to his authority, and an act of lèse-majesté against the man who saw himself as the architect of Europe's destiny. The continental system wasn't just a strategy against Britain. It had become a symbol of his power, his will imposed upon the world. Alexander's defiance wasn't just breaking a treaty. It was an implicit statement that Napoleon's will could be ignored, his power questioned. And this is where you see a crucial, terrifying insight into his leadership. For Napoleon, politics and personal pride were inextricably linked. A strategic necessity, the continental system, transmuted into a point of personal honor, a sacred vow etched in ego. He could not tolerate defiance, especially from a monarch he privately viewed as less capable, less visionary than himself. This wasn't a problem for negotiation, for finding a compromise. It was a challenge to be crushed, an insult to be avenged. His response was total, disproportionate. Not diplomacy, but the annihilation of the Tsar's will through overwhelming force. Consider the tragic irony. In seeking to preserve the cornerstone of his anti-British strategy, fueled by wounded vanity, he embarked on a path that would ultimately lead to the ruin of his entire empire, indirectly freeing Britain from the very system he sought to protect. This reveals a chilling truth about leadership. The failure to distinguish between strategic objectives and personal ego can lead to catastrophic decisions. Allowing pride, wounded vanity, or the inability to tolerate disagreement to dictate policy often results in responses that are disproportionate, irrational, and laden with unforeseen, disastrous consequences. Your biggest policy failures might not stem from poor data or flawed analysis, but from the raw, corrosive sting of wounded vanity. Ask yourself, when faced with resistance, do you see a problem to be solved or a personal challenge to be crushed? What would you sacrifice to protect your pride? You walk among the vanguard as it pushes deeper into Lithuania. The air bites with an unnatural chill, even in summer, and the sheer diversity of the Grande Armée is astonishing. Regiments in kaleidoscopic uniforms march alongside you. Prussians in their dark blue, Poles in crimson, Italians in green, Dutchmen in their drab coats. A true babel of languages washing over the creaking wagons and the ceaseless tramp of feet. They are bound together only by the tricolor banner snapping overhead and the iron discipline Napoleon imposed. This was his vision made manifest. A united Europe under French hegemony, a force drawn from across the continent, loyal first to the emperor, then perhaps to their own distant homelands. 700,000 men, nearly 750,000 souls, followed by 250,000 horses. A migration of monumental, unprecedented scale. It is a breathtaking spectacle, a testament to the force of one man's will to orchestrate nations into a single, unstoppable hammer blow aimed at Moscow. Yet even as you march, a creeping unease settles in. This scale, this immense, unwieldy mass, masks fatal weaknesses that begin to fray at the edges almost immediately. The logistical backbone, designed for campaigns in the familiar, densely populated landscapes of Central Europe, where supplies could be easily requisitioned from local farms and towns, buckles under the strain of feeding this colossal beast in the sparsely populated, vast emptiness of Russia. Towns are too small, distances too great. The scorched earth tactics of the retreating Russians, leaving little behind but dust and desperation. Supply lines, already stretched thin, snap under the pressure. Wagons break down, forage for the horses disappears, and the promised rations fail to arrive. Communication, reliant on couriers traversing impossible distances, becomes a nightmare. Delays measured in days, sometimes weeks. The emperor's will, once the binding glue, struggles to penetrate the chaos at the front lines. Discipline, the iron rod of this diverse force, begins to fray amongst disillusioned conscripts, forced far from home, and reluctant allies who feel more like prisoners of war, marching towards their own doom. The profound, tragic insight here is starkly visible in the dust rising from the ill-fed columns. Raw numbers are not synonymous with strength. You have assembled the largest army in European history, a force that should, by all logic, sweep aside any resistance. But a massive, heterogeneous force, without robust infrastructure to support it, without shared motivation binding its disparate parts, without efficient supply lines feeding its voracious appetite, is less an army and more a vulnerable, slow-moving crowd marching towards potential annihilation. Scale amplifies problems exponentially if the underlying systems aren't built to support it. Napoleon built an army of nations, but forgot to build the bridges, the supply depots, the communication networks capable of sustaining such a creation in an unforgiving environment. It was like building the tallest skyscraper in the world, but neglecting the foundation and the plumbing. What would you have done, standing in his boots, facing the ever-lengthening lines of starving soldiers and dying horses? Knowing the sheer weight of your ambition was crushing the very force meant to achieve it. The reflection is cold and clear. For anyone managing a large, complex enterprise, be it an army or an empire or a company, growth without adequate infrastructure, without integration of diverse elements, and without robust supply is a recipe for collapse. Your biggest asset, your scale and diversity, can quickly become your greatest liability if you can't feed, supply, and unify it. Was this the height of strategic brilliance, assembling Europe's power, or the ultimate hubris, believing sheer mass could defy the immutable laws of logistics and geography? The plains of Russia offer a brutal, silent answer. Ghosts on the steppe, the empty land. You are marching through endless pine forests and vast, empty plains. The air bites with a chill that promises far worse to come. You came here, into this immense Russian interior, seeking a decisive battle, a grand maneuver that would force the Tsar to terms, just as so many emperors and kings before him had been forced. But the enemy you expected to find, to corner, and defeat in a swift, overwhelming clash, isn't here. They are specters, melting away like snow in spring, retreating further with each agonizing step you take eastward. This is not the chessboard of Europe you know. This is a land weaponized. The Russians are employing a cruel, brutal tactic, scorched earth. As their armies withdraw, they burn villages to the ground, poison wells, destroy grain stores, leave nothing behind but ash, mud, and the biting wind. Every step forward leads you deeper into a void, an emptiness that strips your army of shelter, sustenance, and hope. The land itself becomes an enemy more formidable than any cavalry charge or infantry square. It is immense, indifferent, and utterly uncooperative. Napoleon, the master of rapid advance, concentration of force, and decisive engagement at a chosen point, is frustrated. His genius was forged in the crucible of maneuver warfare, where armies met on fields and strategy dictated victory or defeat in a single afternoon. That preferred method, his signature move, is useless against a retreating phantom army that refuses to stand and fight on his terms. The Russians aren't losing battles. They are simply surviving, trading space for time, leveraging the sheer, terrifying scale of their geography against the Grande Armée. Their strategy is attrition, a war of exhaustion, letting the vastness and the coming winter do what their soldiers cannot. This is a critical, and perhaps tragic, leadership insight playing out in slow motion across leagues of desolate territory. Napoleon, relying solely on his established strengths, his speed, his tactical brilliance in battle, finds these very strengths rendered impotent when facing an opponent who understands his methods perfectly and refuses to play by his rules. The Russians didn't need to win battles. They just needed to survive and wait for the elements to turn. Their strategy wasn't about military victory in the traditional sense. It was about endurance and exploiting the environmental advantage. Ask yourself, standing in Napoleon's boots amidst the smoke and the hunger, was his decision to push deeper, seeking a battle that would never come, brilliance, or stubborn adherence to a past success? True strategic genius, the kind that separates legends from cautionary tales, often lies not in forcing the situation to fit your preferred strategy, but in adapting, innovating, and acknowledging the reality of an uncooperative environment and an unconventional enemy. This campaign, begun with such grand ambition, is becoming a terrifying lesson in the limits of even the greatest will, when faced with an enemy that fights by not fighting. in a land that fights with emptiness. What would you have done, seeing your army swallowed by the void? The roads ahead are no longer roads, but churned-up nightmares of mud. Look around you, now, weeks into the grand advance that was meant to sweep all before it. Wagons carrying vital supplies are sunk axle-deep, abandoned. The thunder of cannons is drowned out by the desperate neighing of horses. Thousands upon thousands collapsing and dying along the route, not from enemy fire, but from sheer exhaustion and lack of fodder. Their carcasses line the path like macabre milestones. You, the soldier on the march, are already a ghost of yourself. Dust choked you yesterday. Today, the relentless rain has turned everything to a clinging, energy-sapping mire. Your boots are sodden, your feet are blistered, and your stomach aches with a constant gnawing hunger. Those promised rations? Long gone, or trapped somewhere in the logistical chaos far behind. The supply train, the very lifeline of this vast army, has fractured under its own impossible weight and the sheer scale of the desolate landscape. It's a cruel, ironic twist. The army designed to conquer nations is being slowly consumed by the ground beneath its feet and the emptiness in its belly. Disease, too, is a silent, relentless enemy. Dysentery rips through the ranks. Typhus claims men in their hundreds, their bodies left by the roadside or in makeshift, disease-ridden camps. This isn't glory. This is a slow, agonizing disintegration. Your army, the Grande Armée, is bleeding soldiers at an alarming rate before a single major battle has even been fought. The vision of a swift, decisive campaign, fueled by momentum and the land itself, is crumbling into a muddy, disease-infested reality. The brutal, unvarnished truth emerges here. Grand strategy, brilliant on maps and in council rooms, means absolutely nothing without the mundane, back-breaking work of logistics. The tail, the food, the water, the ammunition, the medical care is not just important, it is the army itself. Neglecting the fundamental requirements of supporting your force, believing that sheer forward momentum and the charisma of a leader will suffice, is a guaranteed path to failure. It is a profound, tragic irony. The emperor who mastered the battlefield is being undone by mud and empty wagons. This moment offers a chilling insight. Visionaries need operational experts. The most brilliant plan ever conceived is utterly useless if you cannot get the resources, the people, and the support systems in place to execute it. Pay attention to the unglamorous details. They are not just footnotes. They are the very structure upon which success or devastating failure rests. Ask yourself, when has a grand plan in your life or work fallen apart because you ignored the practical, messy reality of the tale? This unseen enemy, mud and hunger, was perhaps more formidable than any czar. You stand in the temporary headquarters, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and hurried dispatches. Outside, the Russian summer is fading, replaced by a chill that bites harder each morning. You are in Vilnius, or later, Smolensk. Messengers arrive relentlessly, their faces etched with grim tidings. Reports are laid before you. Supplies, already stretched thin across this vast, alien landscape, are dwindling to dangerous levels. The sick lists glow exponentially, a silent enemy felling men faster than any battle. Desertions are a quiet hemorrhage, bleeding the army dry from the edges. And the enemy? Still retreating, drawing you deeper, deeper into the heart of their endless territory. Your marshals, men who have ridden with you from Marengo to Wagram, look at you with faces clouded by concern. Seasoned advisors, their loyalty unquestioned, voice their fears openly. They urge caution. Halt the advance, they plead. Consolidate the gains already made. Lithuania, parts of Belarus. Wait out the winter in fortified positions. Resupply, rest the troops. Prepare for a campaign next spring, if necessary. Their voices are a chorus of reason against the mounting evidence of impending disaster. But your response is immediate, unwavering. Push on, to Moscow. Always push on. You believe, with a conviction that has moved mountains before, that capturing the ancient capital is the key. It will force the Tsar's hand, break his resolve, compel him to negotiate on your terms. Surely, Moscow holds the vast supplies your army so desperately needs. It represents the decisive political and symbolic blow that will end this arduous campaign. You hear the reports, but you do not truly process them. The dwindling numbers, the failing logistics, the enemy's strategy of denial. These are mere obstacles, temporary setbacks in the grand design. The next town, the next battle, capturing the next objective, surely that will solve everything. You dismiss the mounting evidence of disaster, not out of ignorance, but out of a fierce, almost religious adherence to your ultimate goal. You're not merely walking towards Moscow. You are chasing a mirage, believing it holds the oasis that will save you, even as the ground beneath your feet turns to burning sand. This scene reveals a dangerous, perhaps fatal, side of a leader's self-belief. Conviction is the engine that drives ambition, the steel in the spine needed to forge an empire. But here, it curdles into something else entirely. An inability to process negative feedback. A refusal to adjust course in the face of undeniable, contrary evidence. Napoleon, the master strategist, becomes blind. So fixated on the ultimate goal, Moscow, that he is incapable of seeing the rapid deterioration of his means, the Grande Armée itself. This isn't just arrogance, it's something more insidious. Hubris in this moment is the active, willful rejection of reality because it contradicts your desired narrative. You want Moscow to be the solution. Therefore, the problems that suggest it isn't cannot be truly acknowledged. It is the ultimate tragic irony. The visionary leader, capable of seeing further than anyone else, choosing not to see what is directly in front of him. Ask yourself, what would you have done standing in his boots? Could you have heard the truth in the weary voices of your marshals? Could you have looked at the sick lists and the empty supply wagons and admitted that the plan, your brilliant plan, was failing? A truly great leader listens, truly listens, to dissenting voices and negative data. Even when it's painful, even when it feels like a personal attack on their vision. Because reality is the only ground on which sustainable success can be built. Ignoring the gathering storm doesn't make it go away. It just ensures you're caught in its full fury, unprepared. The march to Moscow continues, a date with destiny, or perhaps just reality, tragically ignored. You stand days later on the field of Borodino. The early September air hangs thick with the scent of something metallic and sweet, the stench of decay, the butcher's bill come due. Around you, the landscape is a horror show. Tens of thousands, perhaps as many as 70,000 men from both sides, litter the ground. They lie twisted and still, a gruesome harvest sown in fire and steel. The fields, once green, are now stained crimson by a tide of blood that seems to have seeped into the very earth. This was it. This was the pitched battle Napoleon craved, the one intended to shatter the Russian army under Kutuzov, to break their will and open the road to Moscow unhindered. It was, instead, a monstrous, bloody slugfest, perhaps the most brutal single day of battle the world had ever seen, or would for decades to come. The fighting raged with unimaginable ferocity. Redoubts were taken and retaken, cavalry charges shattered against squares, and artillery tore through massed ranks with horrifying efficiency. By evening, the French technically held the field. The Russian army had retreated, but not in rout. They withdrew in order, battered, yes, but unbroken as a cohesive fighting force. Napoleon had won a tactical victory. His enemy had left the immediate ground. But the cost was unbearable. His irreplaceable veteran troops, the backbone of the Grande Armée, were decimated. Whole regiments were annihilated, leaving gaps that could never truly be filled. The strategic objective, the destruction of the Russian army, remained unachieved. And here, in the heart of the carnage, lies a pivotal moment, shrouded in debate. As the day ground on, as the battle hung in the balance, Napoleon hesitated. His legendary Imperial Guard, his ultimate reserve, stood largely uncommitted. They were the hammer that could have perhaps delivered the final, shattering blow, turning the Russian retreat into a full-blown rout. But the order never came. Some whisper of illness, the emperor suffering a fever or a cold. Others point to the sheer, soul-crushing scale of the carnage before him, suggesting even his iron will faltered at the sight of such devastation. Whatever the reason, he held back his most potent weapon. The insight here is stark, painted in the blood and mud of Borodino. This battle embodies the brutal nature of victory and its true, often hidden cost. Not all victories are created equal, and some come at a price so exorbitant they function as strategic defeats. A win that cripples the victor as much or more than the vanquished is a strategic failure, no matter how many enemy flags are captured or how much ground is taken. Napoleon gained a blood-soaked field, a tactical win to trumpet back to Paris, but he lost the ability to decisively end the campaign then and there. He won the battle, but lost the chance to win the war in one stroke. The reflection echoes across the centuries. Be wary of Pyrrhic victories in life and leadership. Achieving a goal through excessive force or at ruinous, unsustainable cost might satisfy the ego in the short term, a fleeting moment of standing on the one field. But it can leave you too weakened, too depleted to face the inevitable challenges that follow. Know when the price of winning is simply too high, when the butcher's bill outweighs the spoils, leaving you victorious but vulnerable. Borodino stands as a monument not just to courage and brutality, but to the devastating consequences of a victory that costs everything. Ask yourself, what wins in your own life have come at a price you later regretted paying? You ride into Moscow with the vanguard in mid-September. Dust coats your uniform, but a different kind of anticipation mixes with trepidation in the air. This is the prize, the ancient heart of Russia. You expect a delegation, a desperate plea for peace, perhaps even a reluctant surrender. Instead, you find an eerie silence that blankets the vast, sprawling city. The golden domes of the Kremlin glint in the autumn sun. The labyrinthine streets stretch out before you, but they are utterly, profoundly empty. Where are the millions? The merchants? The soldiers? The priests? The people? They are gone. They have fled, taking with them anything of value, leaving behind only the husks of their homes and workshops. Governor Rostopchin, with a brutal, almost magnificent spite, ordered the city evacuated and prepared for destruction. You, Napoleon, have captured the symbolic heart of an empire, but you find no pulse. You hold the key to a city that offers no treasures, no supplies, no leverage over the Tsar who refuses to treat. Your grand prize is a ghost town, strategically worthless. It is a conquering, yes, a flag planted on a hill, but the hill is barren and offers no vantage point. The victory tastes like ash. This desolate scene provides one of history's starkest illustrations of a crucial leadership pitfall, achieving a stated goal that proves to be utterly meaningless in practice. You conquered Moscow, pour immense resources and countless lives into taking it, only to find Moscow offered nothing in return. No supplies to weather the coming winter, no pathway to peace, no leverage over the enemy. It was an objective pursued not because it was strategically sound, but because it held immense political and symbolic weight. The belief was that taking the capital must force a surrender. But what if the enemy doesn't play by your rules? What if the symbol is just a symbol? The profound insight here is chillingly simple. Ensure your objectives are truly valuable and achievable in a way that genuinely serves your larger, ultimate aims. Don't confuse symbolic victories with substantive ones. Don't chase empty cities just because they look impressive on a map. Look at this moment, this silent, burning city. Before pouring immense resources, both personal and collective, into achieving any goal, ask yourself with brutal honesty, what happens when I get there? Does this actually move me closer to my ultimate purpose? Or am I just conquering an empty city, planting my flag on a ruin? Make absolutely sure your chosen destination has substance, or the silence you find might be your undoing. You stand within the ancient, storied walls of the Kremlin. Moscow, the prize is finally yours. Your marshals move through the ornate halls, attempting to impose order on a city strangely devoid of its usual inhabitants. A quiet unease permeates the air. The expected cries of surrender are absent, replaced by an unnerving silence. You issue directives, envisioning the winter quarters, the strategic advantage, the leverage this captured capital provides. This is the culmination of months of brutal marching, of battles won at immense cost. The jewel of Russia rests in your hand. But history, it seems, has a taste for tragic irony. A wisp of smoke curls from a distant neighborhood, then another, and another. Not accidental kitchen fires, but deliberate points of ignition, erupting almost simultaneously across the vast city. What begins as scattered flames quickly coalesces, fanned by an increasingly strong wind, into a monstrous, living entity. The heat rises, the roar is deafening. Block after block succumbs to the inferno. Wooden structures feeding the hungry beast, sending embers raining down on your own troops. This is the devastating, horrifying climax of Governor Rostopchin's scorched earth policy. They chose immolation over occupation. The smoke becomes a choking, blinding enemy. The heat within the Kremlin's stone walls grows unbearable. You are forced to abandon your captured sanctuary, retreating through streets that have become fiery canyons. From a palace outside the city, you watch, a solitary figure silhouetted against the apocalyptic glow as your prize is consumed. It burns not for you, but against you. This fire devours the city, yes, but far more critically, this is on. It devours your victory. It annihilates the supplies you desperately needed, denies your weary army shelter against the coming Russian winter, and serves as a brutal, unmistakable message. Russia will destroy its own heart rather than feel your boot heel upon it. This moment underscores a profound, chilling insight into the unpredictable and often suicidal nature of human resistance. You expected submission, perhaps pleas for terms. You received annihilation of your objective by the enemy's own hand. It is the ultimate act of defiance from those who have nothing left to lose but their sovereignty. Power, you learn here, doesn't guarantee control, especially not over the spirit and desperation of others. Be prepared for your actions to provoke responses far more extreme, more self-destructive than you can possibly anticipate. Sometimes, the most dangerous opponent is one who values independence above all else, even survival in the conventional sense. Their willingness to burn their world down consumes your gains in the process. Look at the raging inferno. The miles of fire reflected in your eyes. What does this sight, this ultimate act of self-destruction by your enemy, teach you about the limits of conquest? What would you have done, standing there, watching your strategic objective melt into smoke and ash? Was this predictable? Or did you fatally underestimate the depths of a nation's soul when cornered? The fire is the answer. Weeks bleed into months in the ghost city of Moscow. September yields to the bite of October air. You, Napoleon, wait. Your Grande Armée, or what remains of it, shivers amidst the ruins and in makeshift camps outside the smoldering heart of the city. You send messengers, riders braving the vast empty plains, carrying offers of peace to Tsar Alexander. Surely, you reason, the shock of losing his ancient capital, reduced to ash by the very hand of his own people, must force him to the negotiating table. You gamble everything on his will breaking, on him bowing to the inevitable. But no reply comes. Only the relentless, deepening silence of the Russian steppe. Alexander, bolstered by the defiance of his generals, by the grim, inspiring sight of his burning city, a sacrifice that screams resistance, not surrender, refuses to treat with the invader who stands amidst its destruction. He sees not defeat in the smoke, but a terrible, potent resolve. You're trapped, not by a physical barrier, but by your own strategic gamble gone awry. To order a retreat now feels like admitting failure, like stamping the word defeat across the glorious, audacious name of the Grande Armée. You hesitate, you linger. Precious weeks, heavier than gold, slip through your fingers like sand. Weeks that are steadily, irrevocably sealing the army's fate as the breath of the Russian winter grows colder, sharper. You are caught in a self-imposed delusion, hoping for an outcome you haven't earned, waiting for a negotiation that will never arrive. This waiting game is a stark, chilling illustration of a critical failure in decisive leadership. Confusing paralysis with strategy. You allow wishful thinking, the desperate hope that Alexander will crack, to utterly paralyze necessary action. You gambled on the Tsar's spirit breaking, When it didn't, you couldn't immediately absorb the failure of your fundamental premise and adapt. You stood frozen, staring at a mirage of peace, while reality, in the form of the coming blizzard, was about to deliver a brutal reckoning. The insight here is simple, brutal, and timeless. Hope is not a strategy. Waiting for your opponent to fold when they have shown every sign of unwavering resolve, especially as your own position deteriorates day by day, is not calculation. It is desperation cloaked in denial. Ask yourself, when was the last time you waited too long, hoping for a problem to solve itself, rather than acting decisively? The reflection is clear, forged in the ice of this moment. Recognize when your initial plan has failed. Accept the setback, however painful, and act swiftly to mitigate the consequences, even if it means abandoning your objective entirely. The longer you stand in a losing position, hoping for a miracle that isn't coming, the more catastrophic the eventual, inevitable reckoning will be. Your delay in Moscow was a testament to the fatal cost of mistaking stubbornness for strength and hope for a plan. Finally, in mid-October, the air sharpens with a new urgency. The long-awaited, much-dreaded order is given: retreat. You join the long, dispirited columns spilling out of Moscow, a city now emptied of its prize and slowly beginning to burn behind you. The grand parade of arrival has become a shuffling, mournful exodus. The initial hope is to head south, towards untouched lands, richer pickings, and a more southerly route home. But you are met with fierce Russian resistance at Maloy-Yaroslavets. The cost is too high, the time lost too precious. The southern path is blocked. There is only one alternative, only one road left open. The same ravaged path you took coming in, stretching westward, now stripped bare. Every village burned, every field gleaned, every well poisoned or empty. The land itself is a hostile, barren canvas of destruction, painted by your own army's advance. And then the sky changes. The pleasant, unusually warm autumn, the one that perhaps lulled some into a false sense of security about the delay, is brutally, irrevocably cut short. The first snow falls. It's a dusting at first, beautiful but ominous, a chilling whisper of what's to come. Then it grows heavier, denser. The wind picks up, an icy hand reaching through threadbare uniforms. The temperature plummets. The cold bites deeper each day. An enemy far more relentless and indifferent than any Tsar or general. This isn't just uncomfortable weather. It is a siege laid by the elements. The retreat, which was already arduous, transforms into a desperate, day-to-day struggle for mere survival. You march, or rather, you shuffle, through a world turned white and hostile. Hunger is a constant, gnawing pain. Frostbite begins its cruel work, turning extremities black and numb. The organized formations dissolve. Regiments merge. Men huddle together for warmth. Discipline erodes under the primal need for food and shelter. Behind you, the Russian Cossacks and partisans, ghosts in the snow-laden woods, harry the flanks, cutting down stragglers, turning a difficult march into a constant, terrifying gauntlet. This is it. This frozen, starving march back along a dead road marks the true turning point of the disaster. The failure wasn't solely in reaching Moscow, or even the strategic deadlock there. The fatal error lay in the timing and the condition of the return journey. The delay in Moscow, born of Napoleon's stubborn refusal to admit defeat, his hope that the Tsar would sue for peace, meant that when the order was finally given, it was already too late. The window of opportunity for a manageable retreat in decent weather had slammed shut. This is the stark, brutal insight. Strategy must account for environmental realities and inviolable timelines. Nature, unlike human opponents, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be intimidated by reputation or past victories. Delaying essential, difficult actions, like admitting a campaign has failed and retreating, due to political considerations or psychological barriers, the inability to stomach the appearance of defeat, allows external factors to become overwhelming, insurmountable enemies. The cold and the snow didn't defeat the Grande Armée. Napoleon's delay delivered it into their hands. It forces a reflection. Pay heed to external constraints and deadlines that are outside your control. Procrastination in the face of an inevitable, worsening situation isn't just poor planning, it is self-destruction. Sometimes, the most strategic, even brilliant move is simply recognizing that the season has irrevocably changed and getting out of the storm's path before it hits with its full, devastating force. What would you have done, standing in Napoleon's frozen boots, knowing the autumn was giving way to the Russian winter? Would you have held on to hope or fled the coming storm? Near the town of Maloyaroslavets, you stand on the edge of a desperate hope. The army, bleeding and weary, sees a different possibility. A route south, towards richer, untouched land, a path unforked by the ravages of war it had already inflicted upon itself. The air hums with a fragile optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, they can escape the coming winter's grip and find sustenance before the true starvation bites. But the Russians are waiting. A brutal, grinding battle erupts around Maloyaroslavets. House to house, street to street, the fight for this alternative path is ferocious. The ground becomes a churned-up mess of blood and mud, layered with fallen bodies. The French fight with the desperation of men who see salvation just within reach. Technically, strategically, the French prevail. They hold the town, they push the Russians back from the immediate vicinity. Yet victory is a hollow drumbeat here. The cost is devastating. Thousands fall on both sides. The southern road, the lifeline, is effectively blocked, not just by Russian resistance, but by the sheer, raw wound of the battle itself. The logistical nightmare of moving a retreating army through such devastation, under constant threat from the renewed Russian forces now firmly dug in to prevent passage south, is insurmountable. The path south is a mirage, paid for in rivers of blood. You watch Napoleon survey the scene, his face etched with the grim calculus of command. The hopeful southern route, the strategic alternative that could have salvaged something from this disaster, is closed. It wasn't just the immediate battle. It was the consequence of earlier choices. The deep push, the delay in Moscow, the failure to adequately secure multiple lines of communication and retreat before commitment. Those early errors created this bottleneck, this single point of catastrophic failure. Now, the strategic necessity of finding supplies, of offering the army any chance of survival, is thwarted. There is only one viable, terrible option left. The army must retreat via the same Smolensk road it used on the advance. You know this road. You've already marched it, watched it picked clean, seen the burned ruins and the nascent piles of bodies from the initial advance. It is a scarred path, a landscape of skeletons and ashes, a place that offers no sustenance, no shelter, no mercy. It is a road of guaranteed deprivation, a corridor of slow, inevitable death by starvation and exposure. The decision is made, the fateful order given. Retreat north, along the devastated track. It's a moment of profound, tragic irony. They won the battle for the southern route, only to lose the option of taking it. It highlights a critical, chilling truth about leadership and consequence. Poor choices compound over time, narrowing your options until the only path left is the one you should have avoided entirely. Early strategic errors create bottlenecks and restrict future maneuverability with brutal finality. The paths you didn't take or failed to secure early on will haunt your choices when crisis strikes. What would you have done standing in his boots, with the cold reality closing in and only one terrible road ahead? This moment forces you to reflect. Think several steps ahead, not just about achieving your goal, but about the possible routes of retreat or alternative courses of action if things go wrong. Leaving yourself only one highly vulnerable path is a gamble rarely worth taking. And here, the dice have fallen, condemning thousands to the scarred road north. Late November. You stand on the frozen, muddy bank of the Berezina River. Around you, the remnants of the Grande Armée are not an army anymore, but a desperate, shivering mob. The vast, glittering force that marched into Russia has been chewed up by distance, disease, starvation, and the implacable winter. Now, two Russian armies are converging, like jaws from the north and south. Ahead, the river, half frozen, an impassable barrier. Behind, certain annihilation. The air is thick with the stench of death and despair, punctuated by the boom of distant cannons drawing ever closer. This is not glorious retreat. It is a frantic scramble for survival against a world that has turned against you. There is no bridge. The enemy destroyed the last one days ago. Only the freezing, lethal water lies between you and potential safety. And time is a cruel master, measured in the approaching drumbeat of enemy artillery. Yet, in this crucible of utter failure, a different kind of heroism emerges. General Eble, a Dutchman whose name should echo through history as loudly as any conquering general, leads a corps of engineers, mostly Dutch themselves. These men are not asked to charge breastworks or outflank an enemy wing. They are asked to defy nature itself. They plunge into the icy current, the water instantly numbing, then burning as they work, assembling flimsy pontoon sections under the relentless spray of enemy fire. It is an impossible task. Their hands freeze to the timber, their clothes turn to ice. Many simply collapse and are swept away or drown. Yet they work, hour after agonizing hour, driven not by grand strategy or patriotic fervor for a distant empire, but by the immediate, desperate need to build a path over hell. The bridges begin to take shape, thin, precarious lines against the raging river. And as soon as the first sections are stable enough, the panic begins. Soldiers, officers, camp followers, everyone surges towards the narrow causeways. The scene is one of unimaginable horror. Cannons zero in on the crossing points, tearing horrific gaps in the packed crowds. The bridges groan and sway. People are crushed underfoot, fall or are pushed into the frigid water, drowning instantly or succumbing to the shock. Horses panic, adding to the chaos. The engineers keep working, repairing breaks under fire, their numbers dwindling with every volley. It is a miracle built on sacrifice, the ultimate paradox of this campaign. Leadership's grand ambition led to this trap. But it is the grit and skill of ordinary men facing immediate death that offers the faintest sliver of hope. Tens of thousands cross over 2 days, a testament to the engineers' almost unbelievable resilience and skill. But tens of thousands more are left behind or perish in the crossing. You see the sheer scale of human suffering, the breakdown of all order, the raw instinct for survival stripping away dignity. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter enabled by the very act of escape. The bridges, once across, must be burned to slow the pursuing Russians, dooming those still on the other side. It is a brutal, necessary act that sears itself into the memory of all who witnessed it. The legend of the Berezina is often told as a story of Napoleon's narrow escape, but the true heart of the tale lies with Eble and his men. They were ordered to work until they died, and many did, perishing from hypothermia and exhaustion shortly after the crossing was complete, having refused to stop working on the bridges even for a moment to warm themselves. This was not strategic genius saving the day. It was individual courage and collective resilience, forcing a sliver of possibility out of absolute disaster. It reveals a profound truth. While catastrophic failure can originate at the top, the capacity for survival, for ingenuity in the face of immediate, life-threatening challenges, often resides within the group, the individuals fighting simply for the next breath. Consider this: when grand plans collapse and the system fails you entirely, where does true resilience lie? Is it in the leader's command, or in the capacity of ordinary people, like those Dutch engineers plunging into the freezing Berezina, to combine grit, teamwork, and ingenuity just to see another sunrise? What does the agony of the Berezina tell us about the real cost of ambition, not just in terms of lives lost on the battlefield, but in the desperate, horrifying struggle for survival, when the dream turns into a nightmare? Smorgoni, early December 1812. The wind bites with a malice that tears through the threadbare coats of ghosts. What was once the magnificent Grande Armée is now a skeletal procession, staggering through the unending white. The sun is a pale, indifferent coin in the sky, offering no warmth, only the stock confirmation of your despair. You are among them, bone-weary, your feet raw, your belly hollow. The Emperor, the man who led you to the edges of the world and promised glory, is here with you, sharing, or so you believe, the harsh reality of the retreat. But here, in this desolate town, Napoleon makes a choice. It is a moment of brutal clarity, a stark act of self-preservation wrapped in the cloak of strategic necessity. The fastest sleighs are prepared. A select few officers, including Berthier and Caulaincourt, are readied for a journey of frantic speed. The destination? Paris. His stated mission? To prevent chaos, to outrun the whispers of a coup plot led by the bizarre General Mallet, a plot that actually had occurred and been put down while Napoleon was still deep in Russia. A detail that speaks volumes about the fractured communication lines and Napoleon's gnawing paranoia. And to raise a new army, the vital lifeblood his dying force can no longer provide. He argues, perhaps even convinces himself, that his presence in the capital is the only thing that can stabilize the wobbling structure of his empire, the foundation upon which any future recovery must be built. He leaves the shattered remnants of his grand design under the command of his brother-in-law, Joachim Murat, the flamboyant king of Naples, a man renowned for his bravery in a charge, but utterly lacking the logistical and organizational acumen required to shepherd a dying army through a frozen hellscape. It is a calculated handover, placing the burden of the impossible onto shoulders ill-equipped to bear it. And then, with a speed that mocks the agonizing crawl of the columns he leaves behind, he is gone. The sleighs vanish into the swirling snow, a dark streak against the white, carrying away the very symbol of the ambition that brought everyone to this frozen wasteland. To the soldiers, starving, freezing, dying in their thousands each day, the strategic arguments dissolve like snowflakes on a hot stove. This is not leadership. This is abandonment. The man who demanded absolute loyalty, who promised plunder and prestige, who marched them across a continent and into the jaws of winter, is leaving them to their fate. The unspoken contract is broken. He demanded everything, their blood, their endurance, their very lives. And now, when they are at their most vulnerable, he prioritizes his own survival, his own power base. It is a profound moral failure, a corrosive act that eats away at the bonds of loyalty faster than the frostbite claims fingers and toes. The man who built an empire on the devotion of his troops demonstrates, in this chilling moment, the ultimate calculus of power. The survival of the regime and its leader supersedes the welfare of the pawns on the board. While strategically, getting back to Paris to rally support and resources was undeniably crucial for the long-term survival of his empire, the manner and timing of his departure inflicted irreparable damage. It wasn't just leaving, it was fleeing the scene of the disaster he had orchestrated. It eroded the myth of the emperor who shared every hardship, replacing it with the bitter reality of a commander prioritizing his throne over his men. This moment is a tragic irony. By saving himself to fight another day, Napoleon sowed seeds of doubt and resentment that would plague his future campaigns and contribute to the eventual erosion of his support. Ask yourself, when does strategic necessity cross the line into moral bankruptcy? What is the true measure of a leader's responsibility to those they command, especially when the cause seems lost? This decision, made in the biting cold of Smorgoni, reveals a brutal truth about the nature of ambition and power. The ultimate price is often paid not by the leader at the top, but by the countless lives sacrificed at the base. His legacy would forever be marked not just by the glittering victories, but by the frozen tracks of the sleigh that carried him away from his dying army. You are back at the Niemen River, but this time it is December 1812. The sun, a pale, indifferent eye, hangs low over a landscape bleached white by snow and gray by the bone-deep chill. 6 months ago, you saw hundreds of thousands, a vibrant tapestry of nations, crossing this same water, banners snapping, drums beating, anticipation shimmering like a heat haze. They marched east, towards Moscow, towards destiny. Now you stand again by the ice-choked river, and across it stumble the ghosts. No hundreds of thousands, but a few tens of thousands, maybe fewer by the hour. They are not soldiers, they are specters wrapped in rags. Faces are blackened, grotesque masks of frostbite. Limbs are missing, marked only by empty sleeves or dragging steps. Their uniforms, if they can still be called uniforms, are shredded, filthy, inadequate protection against a cold that seems to have teeth. There are no banners, no drums, no triumphant fanfares, just the silence, broken only by the agonizing coughs that rack gaunt chests and the sickening crunch of footsteps on frozen snow. This is the Grande Armée, or rather, what is left of it, consumed not by glorious battle, but by the brutal, indifferent vastness of Russia, by starvation, disease, and a cold that froze ambition itself. This scene, this slow, shuffling horror show crossing back over the Niemen, is the brutal, unvarnished consequence of overreach. It is not an abstract number in a war report, a statistic on a casualty list. It is the physical wreckage of human beings, the destruction of potential, the shattering of lives. The mighty tool forged by Napoleon, honed on 100 battlefields, the very symbol of his seemingly invincible will, is broken beyond repair. Here is the true insight. The ultimate cost of unchecked ambition and strategic failure is not just the loss of land or political power. It is the utter destruction of the human capital, the talent, the trust built over years and decades. It is the decimation of the very people who believed in the vision, who followed the flag, who sacrificed everything for the dream. This army, this shattered remnant, represents a loss that could not be replaced. It was a core resource, spent irrevocably, destroyed in the pursuit of a prize that vanished like smoke. Look at them, stumbling past. Ask yourself, what was the real price of the march to Moscow? Was it worth this? Measure the true cost of your own ambitions, not just in financial terms or power gained or lost, but in the toll it takes on the people who follow you, who support you, who make your vision possible, and on the resources that, once gone, can never be recovered. Some losses are simply irreplaceable. The remnants crossing the Niemen are the silent, frozen monument to that truth. The frostbite on the Niemen River was a cold, hard truth, not just for the men who staggered back, but for a continent built on a fragile balance of power. The news of the disaster in Russia doesn't travel slowly. It erupts like a geyser of ice and doubt across Europe. For years, nations bowed, trembled, or allied with France, not purely out of loyalty, but because the emperor felt untouchable, invincible. That shield, forged in the fires of Austerlitz and Jena, is now cracked, shattered by Russian winter and strategic overreach. You watch from Paris as the reports arrive, first whispers, then a torrent. The Grande Armée, the instrument of your will, is gone. Not just defeated, but annihilated by the elements and attrition. Suddenly, the forced alliances, the uncomfortable subjugations, are no longer held together by the magnetic pull of undeniable strength. They are held by thread, and thread snaps. Prussia, the proud kingdom humbled at Jena, is the first domino to fall. It defects. Then Austria, your reluctant ally, your Emperor Francis I's daughter, Marie-Louise, your empress, steps away from the alliance. The cynical calculation is complete. Napoleon is vulnerable. The time to strike is now. Britain and Russia, long the thorns in your side, find eager new partners. The Sixth Coalition forms, a ring of steel tightening around France, explicitly dedicated not just to limiting French power, but to ending your reign. This is the immediate, devastating consequence of a single, colossal strategic failure. Russia wasn't just a lost campaign. It was the moment the world saw the emperor bleed. The myth of invincibility evaporates, and in its place appears opportunity for every enemy you ever made or held in check. You respond with characteristic, desperate energy. You raise new armies. You call up the Marie-Louises. The young conscripts barely out of their teens, raw, untrained, cannon fodder, with youthful enthusiasm, but none of the hardened cynicism or battlefield wisdom of the veterans lost in the snows. You can give them uniforms, give them guns, but you cannot replace the men who marched to Italy, who stood firm at Austerlitz, who conquered across a continent. This new army is a pale imitation, a fragile shield against the rising tide. The war returns to Germany. You fight battles, Lutzen, Bautzen, where you win tactical victories, but they lack the decisive punch of your earlier triumphs. Your young soldiers break under pressure. Your marshals are stretched thin. Your enemies, emboldened and learning from past defeats, refuse to be cornered decisively. Each skirmish is a draining attrition of men and resources you can no longer easily replace. And the path is direct, relentless. From the frozen plains of Russia in 1812, the war moves west, across Germany in 1813, until, inevitably, tragically, it crosses the Rhine and enters France itself in 1814. The enemy you once dictated terms to in their own capitals now stands on your soil, aiming for Paris. This is the ripple effect of strategic failure laid bare. A single mistake didn't just end a campaign, it fundamentally altered the geopolitical calculus of an entire era. It didn't just weaken you, it galvanized and united those who opposed you, transforming hesitant allies into active enemies. Consider the insight here. Your vulnerabilities are your enemies' opportunities. When you stumble, especially publicly and catastrophically, you don't just reveal weakness, you paint a target. A significant failure doesn't just degrade your capabilities, it serves as the ultimate recruiting sergeant for your opposition, often leading to a cascade of unforeseen and devastating negative consequences. Reflect on this. Your position of power, built on military might and political maneuvering, was fundamentally sustained by the perception of your unshakable strength. The stumble in Russia changed reality, yes, but more importantly, it changed how the world saw you. It invited challenges that just 2 years earlier were unthinkable. You could raise new armies, but you couldn't rebuild the aura of invincibility. Ask yourself, when you stand atop your own carefully constructed pyramid of influence, what happens when a single major pillar crumbles? Do you understand the rapid domino effect of public failure? How quickly perceived weakness can dissolve alliances and empower adversaries? Maintain your strength, absolutely, but never underestimate the power of perception and the devastating speed at which its erosion can lead to ruin. The path from Moscow to Paris was not just geographic. It was the shortest route from ultimate power to existential threat, paved with the frozen corpses of hubris and failed strategy. You turn away from the spectral figures crossing the Niemen, their silence a stark contrast to the grand fanfare of their departure months before. The wind carries not banners, but the chilling echo of what happened when unparalleled ambition collided with brutal reality. This wasn't a battle lost. It was a world unraveling, thread by thread, mile by frozen mile. The invasion of Russia stands as Napoleon's ultimate act of overreach, a monument to a hubris that had swollen unchecked with years of relentless victory. He believed his sheer will, his strategic brilliance, could conquer geography, subdue climate, and break a nation's desperate burning resolve. He was tragically profoundly wrong. The principle revealed here is stark, timeless, and brutal. Ambition, when it morphs into an insatiable hunger that blinds a leader to limits, to risks, to the quiet, inconvenient counsel of reality, inevitably leads to self-destruction. The very drive that built an empire, left unchecked, guaranteed its swift and horrifying unraveling in the snow. What if? The ghosts of those questions drift on the Russian wind. What if he had halted the advance at Smolensk, consolidating gains, establishing crucial supply depots, allowing his forces and the land to recover? What if he had truly listened to the grim warnings of his seasoned marshals, men who understood the brutal arithmetic of distance and winter? What if he had grasped that starving your own army in a vast hostile land to punish an enemy's trade policy is not strategy, but a catastrophic misallocation of priorities, a tragicomic twist of strategic folly? History offers no do-overs, but the lessons carved into the ice of 1812 are clear and unforgiving. This wasn't merely a military defeat orchestrated by a clever enemy. It was a human tragedy born of a singular leadership failure, rooted in an inability to recognize limits. Limits in logistics, limits in geography, and most dangerously, limits in himself. The grand, intoxicating vision collapsed not under enemy fire, but because the essential, humbling details were ignored, and the intoxicating belief in personal infallibility replaced strategic prudence. The story of 1812 is a chilling parable for any age, for any leader, for any individual striving for greatness. It whispers across the centuries, a cautionary tale carried on that same bitter Russian wind, reminding you that the path from the peak of ambition to the depths of ruin can be horrifyingly short when unchecked ego replaces wisdom. It forces you to pause and ask, where does your ambition truly lead you? Do you recognize your limits? The hard edges of reality? Or do you genuinely believe your will can conquer all? The winter of 1812 offers a harsh, unforgettable answer to the latter question. Napoleon himself, reflecting later from exile on St. Helena, grappled with the colossal forces that shaped his destiny and ultimately undid his work. He understood the crushing weight of fate, the unpredictable nature of history, but perhaps less so the role of his own relentless, consuming need for more, always more. As he famously, tragically mused, "I have fought 60 battles, and I have learned nothing from which I might not have learned in the first." A statement heavy with tragic irony, a summation from a man who learned countless lessons on strategy and command, but perhaps missed the most crucial one of all, that even the greatest will bends, eventually, to the unyielding force of reality, especially when ambition becomes a blinding sun that melts away the ground beneath your feet.